So you're saying, when there are certain market forces, that might be the right move because you're not actually trying. It doesn't make sense. For example, if your business is entirely around finding these, you're not trying to build long-term relationships, for example.
Yep. Typically, there's a monopoly scenario going on. There's more demand than we call it a bubble. There's a demand bubble, and you're fulfilling that demand bubble, and there's a lot of long-term considerations that just don't exist.
It's making me think about, from a marketing point of view, the deeper down the funnel you go, the more value is there. So if you keep the customer, that's great, but that's the best, right? But as you go even further, you have all these operational drag that you're describing, where we're just kind of spinning in circles, doing things cross purposes.
That's not because they're not working hard. It's because nobody has a definition of selling, and so they're all running around kind of scattered, and they're not really focused on what you hired them to do. And so when you don't know the rules and you have cross-silo conflict, the cost of chaos in a B2B company, I don't care what the size, we work with the biggest companies in the world as well as small, medium enterprise. Cost of chaos is 20 to 40% of top line. So if you're a $100 million company, you're hand over fist throwing away 20 to 40 million a year.
Rick, welcome to the Growth Stories podcast. So happy to have you here. So you're the CEO of the revenue game. What is the revenue game and how do I win?
Well, anybody who's in business, whether you are an owner, an operator, an employee, or a customer, you're playing the game. The part that's too bad is most of us don't know we're playing the game, and we don't know what the rules are. And so consequently, we end up with what we call a lot of chaos. And so there's a very specific definition of winning. And winning is when you live in a revenue culture, and a revenue culture is where you maximized your profit because you'd already optimized your people in a low friction context. Because if you think about it, you're never going to maximize profit unless your people are optimized. And you can't optimize people in chaos.
I love that. I've noticed that everything I do involves people. They're inescapable. When you get started with a company, what are the first things that usually they're not aware of related to the revenue game, where they're just they don't even realize that this is a big profit leak?
Yeah, great question. The fundamentals, either for being successful or unsuccessful, is your awareness and then your willingness to actually live an intentional purpose. And there's really two purposes. There aren't a lot of choices. The first one is you either are what we call a big purpose company. That's your long-term, you're focused on the buyer, you're focused on transferring as much value to the buyer as possible. And the other choice is you're a mercenary, and you're short-term, you're self-centered, and you're not worried about the other person. It's let the buyer beware, and you're there to deliver whatever they want to pay for and make as much money as you can. And once you make a choice, then you get to live that choice. And it's interesting. There's times we need mercenaries and there's times we need big purpose. And if the buyer or your employees don't know which one you are, that's where the bottom drops out.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, you said something a little provocative in there. When do we need mercenaries? When is that the right case?
Now, it's that time of year where if you live in Florida or New Orleans, you just may have a hurricane show up. And when that hurricane shows up, all of a sudden there's 10 or 15,000 homes with no roofs. Well, there are not enough roofers in Florida to put those roofs back on. So there are actually mercenary companies that come from all over, at least the U.S., maybe the world, and they show up with their truck full of roofing parts and generators, and they know how to work with insurance companies, and they'll show up at your door and say, do you want a roof? I can start right now. And they get to the insurance company and they put a roof on as fast as they can because they want to get to the next house and then the next house and the next house. You're not trying to create a relationship. You're not looking for a partnership. You don't even care, if you like their politics or anything else. You just want the roof.
That makes sense. So what you described is, a supply-demand imbalance. And so you're saying, when there are certain market forces, that might be the right move because you're not actually trying. It doesn't make sense. For example, if your business is entirely around finding these, you're not trying to build long-term relationships, for example.
Yep. Typically, there's a monopoly scenario going on. There's more demand than we call it a bubble. There's
Mhm.
a demand bubble, and you're fulfilling that demand bubble, and there's a lot of long-term considerations that just don't exist.
Right. Love it. Okay. And do you think that, I mean, have in your experience, do you ever find care somebody is surprised to learn that they're doing the mercenary move at the wrong time, or they
As the
didn't realize?
as the buyer or the seller?
As I was thinking of the set.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's normal. So many entrepreneurs are really good at something. They write good code. They are a good welder. They put roofs on well, whatever it is they do, they're really good at it. And they happen to become an entrepreneur because they can see two of their friends need them to help them right now. And then the two friends say good things to other friends, and it is in a bubble demand, and they don't even know it. They just know they
Mhm.
got 4 customers right now. And
Yeah.
so now they're in business. And as long as that demand bubble exists, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, they believe they're running a good company. And then all of a sudden the demand bubble bursts or the competition becomes, competent. And then all of a
Mhm.
sudden you go, oh my gosh, what happened? Why is the world being mean to me? And it's just we were in a bubble. We didn't realize it. And now the bubbles burst and we got to make a decision.
That's a great example. I can think of so many people who it's almost like I'm thinking of in programming, there's this idea of a greedy algorithm. You just take whatever opportunity is easiest and closest to you, and you really have no idea where you're going to end up. It's just that there was some money there. It's not a purposeful aim.
And a great way to think about that is there's in that example of what's your purpose, part of that purpose is your focus on your buyer or is it on yourself? And when
Hmm.
your focus is on your buyer, that example of that algorithm story you told wouldn't really come up because you'd always be asking the question, what's the most valuable thing I can do for the buyer? And so, whatever your answers are, they're directly related to what the buyer believes is value. And if the buyer believes it's value, by definition, the buyer is willing to pay for it. And so, it's a focus thing. Do you focus internally? And one of the simple language pieces, do you decide to make money with your customer or from your customer?
That's
And
very well put. I like this. So it's very clean.
yeah, and it's a question when you ask the rules of the revenue game, that's one you should ask yourself all the time. Do I make money from them or do I make money with them?
So, how I'm curious, just to go one level meta, how have you in your consultancy, how have you been able to choose and set this intention?
I think it started from purpose. I mean, growing up in the auto industry and growing up in Pontiac, Michigan, working for
I
Pontiac,
know that.
you start out watching a company at the end of World War II, there was only one place in the world that could build cars. That was North America. Everybody else was bombed out or, didn't have any
Mhm.
ability. And so we built a lot of crappy cars and did a lot of terrible management organizational stuff. And when you get to live in that and you watch the level of stupidity, really, yet the bubble was so big, they just made
Mhm.
immense amounts of money. And you decided, I don't ever want to do this again. So we really started out with this premise that there was chaos in how business was done that didn't advantage anyone. So our purpose has been to remove that chaos and help, to your original question, help people intentionally win that revenue game.
What are the most common sources of chaos? The chaos is, I mean, I know it when I see it as well, but I'm curious, like, where do you go looking for chaos? One thing that comes right to mind for me that I'd love to ask about is, sometimes I've been involved in larger companies where if my project wins, somebody else's KPIs go down. And it's really kind of funny. Like, what do you do? So where do you look for chaos?
You named there's two major ones, and one of them is really cross silo conflict, and
Hmm.
that's the
Yes.
KPI battle that you're talking about. Because
Yeah.
what's really happening is my silo, if I do a better job on my KPIs, I get additional budget next year, and you don't. Neither of us is focused on the maximum profit for the corporation. We're focused on the maximum benefits for our KPIs.
Hmm.
And so that's one of those. The other one is, which we talked about kind of in jest early, but it's very serious, is we don't know the rules. And so when we don't know the rules, probably, maybe you're not, but you might be surprised to know that in major enterprise corporations, it's not unusual for salespeople to sell less than 1 hour a week. That's not because they're not working hard. It's
Yeah.
because nobody has a definition of selling. And so they're all running around kind of scattered, and they're not really focused on what you hired them to do. And so when you don't know the rules and you have cross silo conflict, the cost of chaos in a B2B company, I don't care what the size, and we worked
Hmm.
with the biggest companies in the world as well as small, medium enterprise. Cost of chaos is 20 to 40% of top line. So if you're a $100 million company, you're hand over fist throwing away 20 to 40 million a year.
I believe it. I completely believe it. It's making me think about, the from a marketing point of view, the deeper down the funnel you go, the more value is there. So if you keep the customer, that's great. But even that's the best, right? But as you go even further, you have all these operational drag that you're describing, where we're just kind of spinning in circles, doing things cross purposes. The
Well,
number though,
if I can play with you for a second, funnels
sure.
are one of the things we would say is, there's a number of words we say don't use. One of them is funnel. Because
Oh,
if you think about a funnel, everybody draws this picture and
mm,
they want to fill the funnel. And then what they want to do is they fill the funnel with people they want to then throw away so they can get to the good ones that'll come through the bottom. So you
hmm,
spend your money to fill the funnel with people you now throw away so you can get to the few good ones. And so that's a perfect example of cost of chaos. Because why did you fill it with people you're going to throw away when you can just change your process and your methodology and only fill it with those people that have a very high probability of not only going through it, but becoming actual buyers? The other one that we hope after today you or none of your viewers will ever use again is the word demo,
yeah.
because demo is about me telling you how smart I am, and you need to give me your money because I'm really smart.
Hmm.
Now,
Yeah.
what I
I can think
should
of demos like this where they skip the discovery, they skip the connection to what actual needs are being solved. And it's just, look at what this does, which, nobody, usually no one cares.
absolutely, if you just kind of switch the demo word to preview, and what you do is you focus on helping the buyer understand, and actually the buyer and the seller jointly understand what the buyer's world would look like if we chose to partner. Now, buyers are much more interested in understanding what their world might look like if we work together than they are finding out how smart I am.
Yes. I'm perpetually trying to communicate this idea. The most common way I hear it is basically like selling the destination, right? Talk about Hawaii and not packing your bags and the flight and the strange airport.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. Well, so right now, at least it feels like it for me in 2025, especially with AI, I feel like, and maybe it's just I'm older, I don't know, but it feels like time is accelerating, like change is accelerating. And I feel like it's a really easy time to just tack on more complexity and chaos into businesses. As we wrap up, what would you say, like, how do we fight this, like, natural tendency to just add complexity and chaos into businesses?
That's a great question. And that's actually part of when we think that way, that creates part of the problem. And part of the problem is, as a buyer, I have less and less time to understand the complexity. I have
Hmm.
less ability mathematically. There are less humans out there for me to potentially hire than there were 20 years ago. So I have less people, I have less time. So what I need business partners who care about my business. And they're back to the message earlier. They only make money when I make money. They
Hmm.
want to be long-term, true partners where they understand me and I understand them, so that I can, get their expertise in my organization without me having to hire them, and without me having to recruit them, and without me having to own that expertise. I own the problem. I don't have to own the expertise to solve it. So I'm a
Hmm.
seller and I want long-term high value relationships. I need to figure, as Drucker said 50 years ago, the purpose of business is to find and keep a customer. He didn't say
Yeah.
buy one. He didn't
Yeah.
say, trick one. He said
Yep.
find one and understand them and know who they are. So that would be my answer to that.
I love that answer. Well, I have one more bonus question just because of the no funnels idea. So I'm curious, how did you start and how are you growing your business now, especially considering you have this concept of, okay, we don't even want to have a funnel.
Yeah. Well, how we started is the first dozen years we were in business, what we knew how to do better than anybody else was to launch extremely expensive, never before seen technology.
Mhm.
And there's a methodology to that. And literally, to get a product from a laboratory or a garage into the street, there's 378 variables that need to be boxes checked and done right. Every variable not under control adds a week to a month to the sales cycle, and some of them will stop it.
Mhm.
So, we learned that years ago, and part of that helps you decide. Everybody thinks, well, I got to get to the market. No, you don't. The market's infinitely greater than your resources to attack it. So the idea of filling a funnel is just taking all those infinitely too many people, throwing them in there and hoping you can find the ones that are good. Well, don't start there. Start with a definition. And there's a thing called the diffusion of innovation, which allows you to be
Ah,
very
yeah.
about who you're looking for. And so don't be wavering on who you're looking for. And that way the funnel concept goes away and you really get to this fine pipeline of those people who fit in that diffusion of innovation curve and have the problem you need to solve, and they have it and want to solve it now. So your pipeline today needs to be very clear on the front end. And then we use a process called joint statement of work, which gets you to the right customer with the right proposal and the right partnership in a hurry.
Love it. Thank you so much, Rick.
It was fun to be here.